Okay, I'm going to be talking today about the Holly Fretwell article, the MPS franchise, a better way to protect our heritage. And the rationale for doing that is to highlight some things and some skills that will be very important for writing your summaries. And not just writing summaries, but making sure that the summaries that you write are really effective ones. So if you have not yet read the MPS franchise by Holly Fretwell, yet, please make sure you do that. It's posted in this same module. Give it a read and then come back and watch the rest of this video because it's not really going to make sense without the context of the article. So I want to take a look at what I would call a very ineffective summary of this Holly Fretwell article. And we're looking at it because it's fairly typical of what I often see students come up with on their first draft of summaries. It really highlights some issues that students have with this assignment. Whether or not, I mean, nobody's going to be writing about this particular article, but with all of the articles in this series. So again, this is typical of a summary draft that I would see. Holly Fretwell's better way to protect our heritage is about how she wants to better fund national parks. She says that there are many risks that the parks face, especially including a lack of funding. That makes it hard to get money from Congress. There are some good ways to improve the budget, including raising entry fees. Nonetheless, the perception that Congress does or will appropriate budgets in a manner sufficient to cover the costs of protecting America's national parks is erroneous. Fretwell lists several parks that thrive on private funding. She says that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to park management. She wants to celebrate the centennial by creating new parks. So I'll call your attention to a few things about this. Um, I've shown this to students before, and maybe they'll critique that there's one or two grammar issues, that there's, the title isn't the full title, it's not punctuated correctly, there's some vague language. We have a quote that's just dropped in but not explained. All of those are important issues, and they're things that I would want to see the student address when they revise. But actually, there's something that's much, much more important, which is that this summary is a great example of, the cliche, right? Missing the forest for the trees. We have a lot of trees in the summary. There's a lot of details and points from the essay. Every sentence in the summary actually is accurate. There's nothing that this student says about the essay that isn't true. However, as a whole, this summary, I would say, is inaccurate because it fails to explain what the essay is really about. It doesn't show how all of these different ideas and concepts and details fit together. It doesn't show what Fretwell's really important idea is and how that idea helps address some of the problems that are described in this summary. And the big thing I would say is that the title of this essay is The NPS Franchise, A Better Way to Protect Our Heritage. And this summary never explains what the franchise is, what that concept means, how it applies to national parks, and how this franchise model would help us protect our heritage. That is a huge omission. And again, it's the kind of thing I see fairly frequently in student summary drafts, and then I hope I don't see right in the final version of this essay is we kind of go through and we pick up details and ideas, but we never connect them and show how they fit together. And we don't explain maybe really central concepts that are really important for these essays. So we'll just talk through Fretwell's essay a bit. It's not really so important because I really want you to understand Holly Fretwell's essay, but again, just as a model for how we would go about doing this work. One of the things, if I were working on this essay, that I would want to do is rather than just kind of blindly kind of scrolling through and highlighting specific sentences, I mean, that's not a bad way to start, but when I'm really sitting down to write, I would look at this title and think about big ideas and say, okay, the NPS franchise, a better way to protect our heritage. What is that? What does that mean? We get a lot of information here. We hear about a bunch of challenges. Here are some problems that are being faced by NPS having to do with infrastructure, maintenance, environmental degradation, etc. But I don't see the word franchise there. In this section, the political impact, we get a lot about how the National Park Service system is funded, how that relates to the federal budget, and then what kind of people get rewarded for politically. Fretwell points out that you get a lot of press for opening a new park. You don't get very much press for investing money in maintaining things like plumbing or sewage systems that maybe seem unglamorous but are really important. But there's nothing in there about franchises. Covering costs. There's something in here about raising entry fees. And if you know a little bit about franchising and you know, maybe if you have a business background, you might say, okay, well, that reminds me of something having to do with franchises. But again, that is never defined. It's only at the end, new methods to manage new parks, does Fretwell point out or explain her franchise concept. It is time for a new strategy to get out from under the burden of park politics and let park constituents create and maintain new parks. Following the successful charter schools model, why not allow proponents of new parks a method to get under the NPS umbrella without requiring full federal management? Similar to a charter, interested parties could design and create a new park. Operating more like a franchise, the private proponent, whether it be a nonprofit organization, business, or individual, would maintain ownership and manage the unit. Consider an NPS franchise model for expanding protected areas through independently managed national parks. This is what Fretwell means when she talks about the NPS franchise. And if you go back to our summary note, that is never explained. So here's a question. Fretwell doesn't write about it until the end of her essay or the end of her article. Where should it fit in our summary? I think our default is to work through these articles kind of in the order that they are presented, right? So she talks about this in section 1, this in section 2, this in section 3, this in section 4, and maybe that makes sense. In this summary, since I had such a hard time understanding what the franchise model is, and so much so that I never even talked about it in my summary, I might try putting it first, explaining what the franchise model is first. Holly Fretwell's Better Way to Protect Our Heritage is about how she wants to better fund national parks through what she calls a franchise model. Under this system, right? And then maybe I have 2 or 3 more sentences that explain what that system is. This does a few things that are very helpful for my reader. And remember, my reader is somebody who has never read this article. One, it highlights the central concept right away. We know that this article is about a lot of things. It touches on many different issues, but at the core of it is this idea about a franchise model. So why not introduce it right away? Why leave it to the end of our summary? Fretwell can leave it to the end of her article because she's got a bunch of space, but we don't have a lot of space. We want to put things right up front. Another reason why it might help to put things up front is because once we understand that franchise model, we're going to understand, and as writers, we're going to explain how the franchise model helps address the problems that are then outlined. She says that there are many risks that the parks face, especially including a lack of funding. Okay, great. Now I can use the franchise model template to explain how they could increase their funding. Well, under the franchise model, you could introduce a new park and they could charge really high entry fees. So they wouldn't draw on taxpayer money. They would just be funded by the people who come into the park. Um, again, we addressed that idea of raising entry fees, but it's not connected to anything. Um, we don't understand how it fits with other things in the summary. Um, Fretwell lists several parks that thrive on private funding. That's a sentence that's in our kind of, right, our ineffective summary. Well, once we understand the franchise model, then we can say Fretwell lists several parks that thrive on private funding in order to show how franchised parks would work. For example, right? And then maybe we talk about, I believe she references like the Mount Vernon historical site, right? And that's not in the National Park Service system, but she shows us how perhaps that could become a part of the system through this franchise model. She says that there is no one size fits all solution to park management. Okay, now that I understand the franchise system, that makes sense to me. We'll franchise these out. We'll give people a little bit more discretion in terms of um, how to operate them. It also helps me understand how it is that she's advocating for creating new parks, even though there's a budget crisis, right? These new parks would not come out of the NPS budget. They would be totally self-funded. So I'm covering a lot of ground here, but what I'm trying to do, rather than kind of go through this whole article sentence by sentence, is to show us how, by stepping back and really thinking about what are some of the key concepts here, what are some of the big ideas, and really taking time to read through those sections, figure them out in depth, we can see how the rest of the article fits together. We do not want to write summaries that look like, um, the way this started. Yeah, it's short. Yeah, there's a drop quote. There's a quotation that's not explained. There's some vague language, etc. Those things are issues. The bigger issue is that it just doesn't tell us what this article is about, what the author is trying to argue, and that is something that we absolutely want to avoid when we're doing these summaries. Because if we write a whole summary that doesn't explain key ideas and concepts, we haven't really done anything very useful. There's a version of this handout on Canvas called Notes on Summary. And in the version I gave you, I've kind of, explained some of these points up here and kind of how they're related to your reading process and how you go about understanding the text. Um, I'll note here at the bottom just some things about choices you'll have to make as a writer. Which ideas do you want to translate into your own words and which require quoting the author's original language? There was a great quote in there about, or a part of a quote about Fretwell saying that the one size fits all model doesn't work. That seemed like a great thing to quote. That's a great way of explaining it. It really helps things click for me. Maybe there's another idea in there that it works a little bit better putting it in my own words. Do you want to include specific details that will help you illuminate the big picture? Is it helpful to tell your reader that Fretwell gives an example of Mount Vernon as the way this kind of park would work? Is it nice to have that kind of concrete detail to help us see and understand the author's ideas? Some of the articles that you guys are going to choose have tons of details. You can't include them all, and you definitely should not. Are there specific ones, though, that would be helpful? What are the most important ideas and concepts that you will need to highlight? I just spoke about that. What elements of the text and its ideas will you include and which will you leave out? What's in this Fretwell article that's not essential? What could we either summarize in half a sentence or leave out altogether? And then, as I was mentioning before, in what order do you want to present the author's ideas? Should you follow the order of the text itself? Or would it make more sense in a summary to kind of reorder them to highlight a main idea, give it a little bit more space, explain it, and then show how other things are connected to it? There are some articles in the series that might feel like they really ramble or you can't figure out the structure, or you don't understand why one section is after the other. In your summary, you want to present them in a way that's clearer than that. It's not to say that the way they're written is bad, but in a one-page summary, you have to make it very logical and clearly structured for your reader to be able to follow. You don't want them wondering in the course of your summary, how does this point fit with the other point? That's something you want to be really clear on. So I'll leave you with this for now. Again, this all, I think, if you've read Fretwell, this should make a lot of sense and should be very helpful. Use these kind of just these notes about summary as you read and as you write your summary. You want to start working on, if you've got your articles, if you haven't chosen your articles, you want to choose your article. If you've chosen your articles, you want to read them. If you've read them, you want to work on having one summary. Just start with one summary, and then we'll go from there. The next video that I'll post by the end of the day Thursday is going to be about Marty Blatz from Civil War to Civil Rights, and we'll have to do with synthesis. You don't have to worry about synthesis at all yet. So just put that out of your mind, focus on summary. Choose your articles, read your articles, and then start writing a summary of one or both. If you can do that this week, you are way ahead of the game. I hope this is helpful. Let me know what questions you have. You can find me on Discord and, of course, through email.